People living in poverty define their situation as a lack of education, health, housing, empowerment, employment, personal security, and more. As such, no one factor is able to capture all the aspects that contribute to poverty. I have long argued that social connectedness is an important missing ingredient of multidimensional poverty, with social isolation being a central component. Given the pervasiveness and intractability of poverty, it seems opportune, if not essential, to consider the people and the communities themselves. Given that many international interventions have failed to yield sustained progress, it seems high time to consider new approaches and develop new awareness that actually place the people themselves in charge of designing and driving progress as determined and set within their own context.
Within programs that address poverty, you also need to look at how connected people are. So it's their social networks eventually, but even before you can have social networks, you have to have the ability to access those. And if you are in isolation, you're not able to access the social capital around you. Our theory has been that if children have meaningful social connections, then their resilience and access to resources would improve. We encourage communities to talk to each other. We build spaces for people to come together to talk. And there's magic that happens in terms of how you, in simple ways, create agency, get people to become creative around their own solutions, but also stand firm around particular issues and come up with whatever needs to be done to solve some of their problems. The social connectedness work is really about activating those conversations.
Many countries now not only have an official monetary poverty measure, but they have an official multidimensional poverty measure. So how do you measure the different deprivations that strike people at the same time? First of all, you have to think about what these might be. You might think of nutrition, you might think of work, you might think of disempowerment, you might think of social isolation, you might think of a lack of clean energy or clean water and sanitation, girls' education, electricity. So there are different dimensions and indicators of poverty. For a multidimensional poverty measure, often we require deprivations in a critical mass of indicators at the same time. And that's to make sure that these are not anomalies in terms of data, but they really reflect an experience of poverty that merits attention and public action. I focus more on government action, and I know sometimes governments are the big bad wolf, but you have to remember that they're also people, and some of you will become them. And really, it's committed people who are infectious.
How can we convince governments and policymakers to actually use these multidimensional poverty indices and to see a lack of social connections as a driver?
A lot of it is taking people on learning journeys. You find that a lot of government officials sit in their offices and do not go out, but they have to make big decisions around a clinic or a school or community, but they haven't been to that community for a year. So it's taking them on learning journeys and then helping them to reflect on what they've seen and what needs to change and where they are in the system and where they can make a difference. So it's really about personal transformation.
One thing I'd like to ask, though, and try to understand is how we can talk about and research poverty within developed countries. And as an Indigenous Canadian, I've had a lot of struggles trying to explain to people how to deal with poverty when we as a country don't see that as a serious issue.
I think that it's actually not different from any other place. You need to do participatory work. What is poverty? How is it different for different communities, different ages, different rural and urban brackets? And try to come up with a common definition that would have political support but also authenticity.
The multidimensional poverty of the First Peoples of Canada is on a par with Chad. And Chad, I asked Sabina today for a refresher as to where does Chad rank in terms of the MPI, and she said fourth from the bottom. So I am so glad that you raised this, and I also think if there's a way to make the case about why looking at poverty as multidimensional to me is not only an alternate way, it's the only way. It's to look at Indigenous peoples in Canada. Human beings are social creatures. We rely on others to help us live, thrive, and grow. So as I see it, a key missing piece of all the efforts required in addressing multidimensional poverty must include social connectedness.